In 2004, a U.S. Navy FA-18 pilot encountered something off San Diego that his radar couldn't lock and his eyes couldn't explain. The object moved in ways that seemed to break every rule of aerodynamics, and the encounter was officially logged and later declassified. For over a decade, the Navy had no public answer for what that pilot saw on that morning. But when researchers finally slowed the footage down frame by frame, the answer waiting inside the data was nothing like what anyone expected. Commander David Fravor wasn't a rookie chasing shadows. He had 18 years of flight experience and a clear sky above the Pacific. His wingman saw it too, and both pilots described the same white, oblong shape hovering roughly 50 feet above a churning patch of ocean. When Fravor banked toward it, the object accelerated and vanished in under a second. What makes this encounter impossible to dismiss isn't the pilot's word alone. It's that the ship's radar had been tracking the object for 2 full weeks before that intercept. Something was out there, returning a real signal, behaving in ways no known aircraft could. The question isn't whether the encounter happened. The question is what, exactly, was sitting on that radar screen. 3 videos changed the official story of what the U.S. government knows about unidentified objects. The Navy filmed all 3 between 2004 and 2015, and for years the footage circulated in leaks and rumors before the Pentagon did something almost no one expected. In April 2020, the Department of Defense formally released all 3 clips and confirmed they were real, unaltered recordings made by U.S. military personnel. The videos carry call signs: FLIR 1, captured off the coast of San Diego; GIMBAL and GOFAST, both filmed over the Atlantic during 2015 training exercises. What the Pentagon confirmed is narrower than most headlines suggested. The objects were unidentified, the footage was authentic, and no conventional explanation had been officially attached to any of them. That last part is the one worth sitting with, because unidentified is a bureaucratic word that carries an enormous amount of weight. So ask yourself, does the government admitting it doesn't know something make you feel safer? Or does it open a door you weren't sure you wanted opened? The footage from those 3 videos wasn't shot on a phone or a cockpit window. It came from a targeting pod bolted to the outside of a military jet. These pods, called FLIR systems, don't capture visible light the way your eyes do. They read heat, mapping temperature differences across the scene as bright and dark regions. A warm engine exhaust glows white-hot, while the cold upper atmosphere sits nearly black behind it. The object you're watching isn't a raw image of reality. It's a false color heat map, processed and interpreted by software before it ever reaches a screen. That distinction matters more than almost anything else when you're trying to figure out what's actually flying out there. FLIR pods are also mounted on gyroscopic gimbals, meaning the camera can swivel independently of the aircraft to keep a target locked in frame. So when something in the footage appears to move, you have to ask a harder question. Did the object move, or did the camera? That rotating object in the gimbal video is the moment most people decide something extraordinary is happening. The shape holds steady, then smoothly rotates in a way no known aircraft is supposed to do. And that rotation is exactly what demands an explanation. What you're watching isn't the object spinning at all. The F-18's targeting pod uses a motorized gimbal to keep a locked target centered in frame as the jet maneuvers beneath it. When that gimbal reaches its mechanical rotation limit, the entire optical assembly rotates to compensate, and that rotation bleeds directly into the image. The object appears to spin because the camera itself is spinning around it. Physicists and sensor engineers who've analyzed the footage frame by frame say the rotation speed and direction match the gimbal's mechanical behavior almost perfectly. There's a specific kind of disappointment in watching a mystery dissolve into a maintenance manual. But the gimbal explanation only covers the rotation. It says nothing about what the object actually was or how fast it was moving. The next video raises a question that sounds even simpler and turns out to be just as slippery. The third video looks like the most dramatic proof of all, an object screaming across the ocean at impossible speed. But the name GOFAST turns out to be the cruelest joke in the whole UFO debate, because the object is almost certainly not going fast at all. The jet carrying the camera was flying at roughly 25,000 feet and moving at high speed itself, and when you do the trigonometry, the apparent ground track velocity of that object drops to somewhere around 40 miles per hour. That's a parallax illusion, the same trick that makes roadside trees blur past your window while distant mountains barely seem to move. The sensor was locked on something low and slow, but the platform carrying that sensor was fast, and your brain fused those two motions into one terrifying streak. So you have tic-tac with no thermal exhaust, gimbal with a rotation caused by its own camera, and now GOFAST that isn't going fast. 3 videos, 3 mundane candidate explanations. And yet the pilots who filmed these weren't confused about the weather or half asleep at a radar screen. So why did people with the best training in the world still describe something genuinely extraordinary? The pilots who filmed these videos weren't guessing. They were absolutely certain of what they saw. And that certainty is exactly what makes their accounts so worth examining. Because confidence and accuracy are not the same thing in the sky. When you're moving at several hundred knots with no fixed reference points around you, your brain fills in the gaps with whatever pattern fits the moment. Inattentional blindness means a trained pilot can miss something obvious while locked onto something unexpected, and the unexpected always wins that fight. The open ocean gives your visual system nothing to anchor speed or scale against, so a balloon drifting at altitude can genuinely look like a craft holding position against the wind. Add the pressure of a live intercept, adrenaline, radio chatter, a wingman calling out something strange, and your perceptual system shifts from observation to confirmation. You're no longer asking what this is, you're building a case for what it already feels like. The harder question is whether the people receiving those reports ever pushed back hard enough to slow that process down. The government's own investigators looked at hundreds of UAP cases and reached a conclusion that managed to satisfy almost nobody. AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, reviewed over 900 reports and resolved the vast majority as misidentified aircraft, balloons, or sensor noise. But a small slice, roughly 2 to 4%, stayed officially unresolved, and that number did a lot of work in the headlines. The 2024 congressional report leaned into that ambiguity rather than closing it, framing the unresolved cases as evidence of a systemic gap rather than a data problem. So why wouldn't investigators push harder to close those remaining cases? The answer isn't incompetence, it's incentive structure. An office that resolves every anomaly loses its budget justification and its seat at the table. Keeping a category called unidentified open is institutionally useful, regardless of what the evidence actually supports. That gap between what the data shows and what the narrative emphasizes is exactly where the real story about these videos begins. So if the most likely answer is sensor glitch and pilot confusion, does that mean nothing happened off San Diego that morning? It means something happened that the most advanced military in human history could not correctly identify with its own equipment. That gap between capability and comprehension is the actual story the Pentagon footage forced into the open. The videos didn't prove extraordinary craft, but they proved the military had been flying with sensor systems its pilots didn't fully understand. Billions spent on radar and infrared cameras, and the operators reading those screens had never been formally trained to recognize their own artifacts. That's not a UFO problem. That's an institutional failure hiding inside one. The AARO report confirmed encounters are still happening, still going unresolved, and still being logged by crews with the same gaps in their training. What Fravor saw that morning was real, the confusion was real, and the system that couldn't explain it is still flying today.